Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Fall in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Fall. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office, collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Fall is a 2022 survival psychological thriller film directed by Scott Mann, who co-wrote the screenplay with Jonathan Frank. The film stars Grace Caroline Currey, Virginia Gardner, Mason Gooding, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan. It follows two women who climb a 2,000-foot, 610-meter decommissioned television tower, only to become stranded at the top with limited supplies and no means of communication. Produced on a budget of $3 million, Fall was released theatrically in the United States on August 12, 2022, by Lionsgate Films. It emerged as a commercial success, grossing $21 million worldwide. The film received generally positive reviews from critics, who praised the central performances by Currey and Gardner and the film's suspenseful premise, although some criticism was directed at the visual effects and screenplay.
Plot.
Becky, her husband Dan, and their friend Hunter are rock climbing when Dan loses his footing and falls to his death. A year later, Becky has become reclusive and withdrawn, struggling with grief and contemplating suicide. She has also become estranged from her father, who believes Dan would not have mourned her in the same way. On the anniversary of Dan's death, Hunter invites Becky to climb the decommissioned 2,000-foot, 610 meters, B-67 TV tower in the desert. Hunter suggests scattering Dan's ashes from the top as a form of closure. Though hesitant, Becky agrees. After reaching the base, the two ascend via a series of rusted ladders to a small platform at the summit. There, Hunter encourages Becky to briefly free hang from the platform while recording the moment for social media. Becky scatters Dan's ashes and they begin their descent, but a ladder segment breaks off, leaving them stranded at the top with no way down. Becky is slightly injured in the fall, and their backpack containing water and a drone lands on a satellite dish far below. With no cellular signal due to interference from the tower's communications equipment, the pair attempt various methods to attract help. Hunter places her phone in a shoe and drops it beyond the interference range, but it fails to result in rescue. They later spot two men with a dog nearby and signal them with a flare gun, but the men steal their car instead. Becky then discovers a tattoo on Hunter's ankle with the numbers 143, a code Dan used to say, "I love you." Hunter admits to having had an affair with Dan before Becky's wedding. The next day, Hunter climbs down using their rope to retrieve the backpack. Though injured, she succeeds in tying the bag to the rope, and Becky hauls it back up. Becky later experiences a hallucination of a vulture attacking Hunter's corpse, which prompts her to realize that Hunter died during the descent and that she has been imagining her presence ever since. With power drawn from a warning light on the tower, Becky recharges the drone and sends it toward a nearby motel with a written message. The drone is struck by a truck and destroyed. As Becky grows weaker from dehydration, a vulture attacks her wounded leg. She kills it and consumes part of it for nourishment. Regaining strength, Becky descends to Hunter's body, hides a phone with a text message to her father inside Hunter's shoe, and pushes the body along with the shoe off the tower. The message is transmitted upon impact. Rescue personnel are alerted and arrive shortly after. Becky is rescued and reunites with her father. Cast: Grace Caroline Currey as Becky Connor, Virginia Gardner as Shiloh Hunter, Mason Gooding as Dan Connor, Jeffrey Dean Morgan as James Connor, Julia Pace Mitchell as Diner Server, credited as Julia Mitchell, Jasper Cole as Steve RV Man with Dog Release, Fall was released theatrically in the United States on August 12, 2022, by Lionsgate, which reportedly spent $4 million on its release and promotion. The film became available digitally on September 27, 2022, and was subsequently released on Blu-ray and DVD on October 18, 2022. Reception. Box office. Fall grossed $7.2 million in the United States and Canada, $14.6 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $21.8 million against a production budget of $3 million. In the United States and Canada, the film was released alongside Mac and Rita and the wide expansion of Bodies, 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 and was projected to earn $12 million from 1,548 theaters during its opening weekend. It earned $923,000 on its first day and went on to debut with $2.5 million, finishing 10th at the box office, but ranking as the highest-grossing new release of the week. Scott Mann's Fall belongs to the trapped horror subgenre of films like The Shallows and Open Water, but it takes a dynamic that usually unfolds in the middle of deep water to thousands of feet in the air. Mann and co-writer Jonathan Frank have a clever concept that results in a film that should be avoided by anyone with even the mildest vertigo. I wouldn't say I'm particularly afraid of heights, but there are some scenes that made my stomach turn a bit. You've been warned. Sadly, the concept only takes Fall so high, and the execution, including some ineffective acting, editing, and other technical choices, makes this a misfire. It doesn't exactly crash to earth as much as drift off into the forgettable air of film history. Becky, Grace Caroline Currey, husband Dan, Mason Gooding, and Becky's BFF Hunter, Virginia Gardner, are climbing a sheer mountain face in the opening scene when tragedy strikes and Dan plummets to the ground below. A year later, Becky is drowning her grief in a bottle, avoiding Hunter and her worried father James, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, taking a part so small that it's like a favor to a friend. One day, Insta-star Hunter comes to Becky with a proposal. They're going to climb an abandoned 2,000-foot TV tower that's basically in the middle of nowhere, from which they will find closure and spread Dan's ashes. Of course, it goes very wrong, leaving Becky and Hunter stranded on top of the tower with no way down and no way to communicate with anyone who might be able to save them. Filmed in the Mojave Desert, the vast majority of Fall takes place on the tower, and the film admittedly gets some nice adrenaline from the initial climb and disastrous ladder collapse that follows. In fact, there's a better version of the film that starts right with the climb, allowing the characters trauma to arise through their conversations on the way up, instead of with a horrendous setup act that's filled with cliches and poor filmmaking. It also would have helped reduce the runtime on a 107-minute movie that should be closer to 87. When Becky and Hunter begin their actual ascent, Mann has his firmest grip on the movie, building tension in a way that can be pretty effective. And then Fall stalls again. Hunter is given a secret that's more like melodrama than realism, vultures and drones get involved, and the movie gets increasingly silly through its final act. The best trapped films usually rely on realism, making viewers feel like they're actually trapped in the rocky waves of a film like Open Water, and Fall crumbles under that analysis. Currey and Gardner give committed performances in physical terms. It looks like an exhausting production, but they're saddled with juvenile dialogue that doesn't capture the terror people would really feel in this situation. Fall only works if we believe the predicament in which Becky and Hunter are trapped, but the thin dialogue, showy cinematography, and overzealous edits betray the potential of this nightmare. Ultimately, Fall has been designed to be seen on as big a screen as possible, which is why Lionsgate is going wide with it this weekend instead of shuffling it off to VOD. Much has been written about getting ticket buyers back into theaters with event movies that demand the theatrical experience. It's too bad this effort to help keep the theater industry aloft will only let viewers down. Review. Fall re-release debates over the title of Jordan Peele's patchy summer hit Nope were settled last month when the secretive writer-director revealed that no, it wasn't an acronym for Not of Planet Earth, but was something far more simple. It was, as others had expected, a nod to what many audiences are accustomed to, warily shouting at the screen during a horror film. Investigate that unsettling sound coming from a barely lit basement in a remote house late at night? Nope. Accept a lift from a creepy stranger in a blood-spattered pickup truck? Nope. Climb up an ancient and abandoned 2,000 feet TV tower without support, food, or alerting anyone else first? Nope. With the release of ridiculous yet undeniably rattling new thriller Fall, it'll be heard on a loop from cinemagoers across the U.S. this weekend, said first with an eye roll before being screamed through sweat-drenched fingers. Hinged on a setup so stupid that it takes some strength to make it through the first 15 minutes without checking out, the buzz-free August surprise manages to erase all early doubt with enough genuine seat-edge suspense to turn it into the most exciting and effectively agonizing action movie of the summer. I found it hard not to quietly cheer while watching this tiny-budgeted underdog swoop in and climb its way to the top of the tower. Mavericks, Thors, and Gray Men falling away with speed. In a sub-cliffhanger cold open, Becky, Grace Caroline Currey, suffers a devastating loss when her husband Dan, Mason Gooding, falls to his death in a climbing accident, leaving her and best friend Hunter, Virginia Gardner, to pick up the pieces. A year later, Becky is drowning her sorrows when Hunter, now a successful YouTuber specializing in extreme stunts, calls, saving her from the brink. The estranged pair reunite when Hunter suggests she join her on an audacious climb to the top of a 2,000 feet tower in the middle of the desert. Spurred on by a vague idea of confronting fear, she says yes. But when they reach the very top, disaster strikes, the ladder falls away, and they're left stranded. It's all head-shakingly ridiculous, and while the script isn't equipped to find a believable justification as to why someone trying to get over such horrific trauma would want to do something quite so deranged, none of that really matters once we're halfway up, a point that we're chillingly reminded is the height of the Eiffel Tower. While the dodgy green screen in the cold open had me worried, despite an astonishingly low $3 million budget, British director Scott Mann manages to make the high-in-the-sky danger feel scarily, stomach-churningly real, and if the pace allowed for it, it'd be tempting to Google just how on earth they managed it all while watching. Despite obvious VFX work, even Tom Cruise would turn down such a stunt, the joins are so hard to spot and the illusions so skillfully conjured that I found myself utterly horribly immersed in the big dumb spectacle of it all. Spanish cinematographer McGregor and an A-game visual effects team used the structure's perspective to breathtaking, dizzyingly queasy effect, and even find time for some rather stunning standalone images, briefly transforming a B-movie into something oddly artful. Stupidity might have got the pair up to the top, but their actions once situated are grounded and satisfyingly competent. Mann and co-writer Jonathan Frank finding an impressive amount of mileage from two people stuck on a small grate with a small bag. It's a puzzle for them to solve, and like the very best survival movies, it has us trying to solve it alongside. Could that or would that? Or how about questions tidily fitting in between the steady stream of nopes? There are two silly derivative twists. The first incredibly easy to spot, and the second incredibly easy to get annoyed with. But it's mostly a pretty straightforward against-the-odds thriller, a throwback of sorts with some slight new tech tweaks. Who knew a selfie stick could be such a vital emergency tool? The tension of it all is heightened even more so by two fully committed performances from little-known actors giving it their all, trying admirably hard to sell some laughably goofy dialogue during a physically grueling vertical obstacle course. Gardner emerges as the real standout, possessing the effervescence of a young Reese Witherspoon. Fall is the rare three-drinks-in what-if elevator pitch that somehow survived the journey to the big screen, made with unusual precision and punch. Director Mann sets his sights low, even as his simple, sturdy film climbs so very, very high, and in doing so, delivers in a way that so few have this year, a $3 million embarrassment to the studios throwing 100 times more at blockbusters with 100 times less of a thrill factor. Arriving in the dog days of summer, it's something of a marvel. Fall is a very good don't look down movie. It's a fun, occasionally cheesy, but mostly ingeniously made thriller about two daredevil climbers, Becky, Grace Caroline Currey, and Hunter, Virginia Gardner, who decide to scale the B-67 TV tower, an abandoned 2,000-foot communication tower that juts up in the middle of the California desert. It's based on an actual structure, the KXTV CoVR Tower outside Sacramento, which is used like the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the skyscraper that became the pedestal for Tom Cruise's You Are There stunt sequences in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. And if, like me, you love that movie in part because of how deviously it toyed with your fear of heights, Fall is likely to hit you as an irresistible piece of vertigo porn. It's for anyone who ate up Ghost Protocol, as well as the awesome rock climbing documentaries Free Solo and The Dawn Wall, and wants to continue that shivery vicarious high. Critics, for some reason, now like to mock the visual sleight of hand that goes into a thriller like this one, as if the CGI involved were all too easy to see through. But in this case, I couldn't disagree more. Fall was shot in the IMAX format in the Mojave Desert, and there are moments when I honestly don't know how the director, Scott Mann, the cinematographer, McGregor, and the two actors did it. Were they actually on a tower? And if so, how high up? Were there stunt people? Or was every bit of this brought off with computer trickery? Popular on Variety. The abandoned TV tower, like the KXTV KOVR tower, is, we're told, the fourth highest structure in the U.S. It has a photogenic vermilion finish. Imagine the Golden Gate Bridge as a rusty hypodermic needle, and it turns out to be the perfect setting for a movie about climbing into the sky. As the two women ascend, the desert below looks like something viewed from an airplane. The trick is that the elements of the image are all visually united. Tower, horizon, climbers. Without a cut, the film will glide from close-ups to vertically angled drops to death-defying panoramas. The light and shadow are always just right. You know how it feels when you watch an old movie with rear projection that's laughably fake? Fall, by contrast, represents a totally credible and innovative use of CGI. Watching the movie, we believe our eyes and, therefore, our raised pulses. The two women have agreed to make this climb as a way to wrest Becky out of her funk. In the film's opening sequence, we see the two ascending a vertical rock face along with Becky's husband, Dan, Mason Gooding, who winds up plunging to his death. A year passes and Becky can't let go of him or of the anxiety that is calcified around the tragedy. Facing her fear, scaling that TV tower along with her best friend, they plan to scatter Dan's ashes when they get to the top, is the only thing that will purge the demon. As terrifyingly tall as the tower is, it doesn't strike us as something that would offer that much of a challenge to highly experienced climbers. There's a ladder on the inside of the caged needle that goes up for 1,800 feet. For the remaining 200 feet, the ladder is outside the structure. I wouldn't want to climb 30 feet of it, but these two aren't scared of heights, and the feat they've laid out for themselves looks a hell of a lot easier than shimmying over the smooth, plunging rock faces they're used to. That's why they succeed pretty quickly. Half an hour into the movie, they've ascended to the small circular platform up top. But along the way, the whole structure has been quivering, with telltale shots of a nut or a bolt coming undone here and there. It's the outside ladder that's getting loose, and as they take the last steps, a chunk of it falls out from under them, the weight of that chunk pulling the rest of the ladder down with it. Just like that, they're stranded. The cylindrical pole that's left is too smooth to climb down. The rope they have isn't long enough, and though they've got their phones, they're up too high to get service. There is nothing up there but the two of them and their do-or-die ingenuity. At the start of the movie, Hunter is all giddy enthusiasm, like a Reese Witherspoon go-getter from the 90s, and Becky, lost in her malaise, is all po-faced misery and dread. But the two actors show you how these women come alive and connect by climbing. It's through their expressive skill that we believe in what we're seeing. Fall was made for just $3 million, and it's good enough to remind me of another perilous small-scale thriller centered on two people doing all they can to survive. Open Water, the scary 2003 indie that basically extended the opening sequence of Jaws over 80 minutes. Movies like these come with built-in narrative devices, like, for instance, the soap opera revelation that comes up between Becky and Hunter. There are moments when the script overdoes the millennial effrontery, especially when it's focused on Hunter's identity as a YouTuber who wants to document the whole climb for her 60,000 followers. This bad boy is over 2,000 feet tall, and your homegirls are going to be climbing to the tippy top. Mostly, though, we're with these two, living through every vulture attack and sudden drop that involves something like hanging from a rope and trying to grab a stranded backpack. Is there a pedestrian below who could save them? The movie deals with that possibility in a way that recalls the Robert Redford Stranded at Sea movie, All Is Lost. Fall is a technical feat of a thriller, yet it's not without a human center. It earns your clenched gut and your white knuckles, like spinning a wheel labeled with people's greatest fears and landing on acrophobia. The latest entry in the thriller subgenre of single-location, anxiety-inducing situations is Fall, a movie that will be torturous for anyone afraid of heights, but could otherwise be a bit of a bore for someone looking for thrills that go beyond that. Movies like Fall don't require much character work, nor do they need much plot beyond the situation at the center of the film, and Fall is no overachiever. With predictable twists and one grating character, the Lionsgate movie tries to do something different from others like it, but it can't quite reach the heights that its main characters aren't, and should be, afraid of. Fall follows Becky, Grace Caroline Currey, and Hunter, Virginia Gardner, who, when the movie opens, are climbing a rock face with Becky's husband Dan, Mason Gooding. When Dan tragically falls to his death, Becky is sent into a tailspin of grief, giving up her favorite pastimes of free climbing and pole dancing to wallow alone at the bar. Soon enough, Hunter shows up with a proposition to climb a 2,000-foot tall radio tower. Mainly, it's so she can film a drone video of Becky hanging from the ledge for her 60,000 followers. When Becky and Hunter reach the top of the out-of-commission tower, the latter falls, and they are stuck nearly half a mile above the desert with no cell service, no water, and no way down. As far as survival thrillers go, Fall follows the playbook established by films like 47 Meters Down or Crawl. As Becky and Hunter look out at the desert surrounding them, Fall offers plenty of visuals that are rendered well enough, with the desert surrounding them becoming even more deadly 2,000 feet above the ground. With limited space to move, it adds a new dimension to claustrophobic thrillers, one that makes the sky just as scary as the endless ocean in survival thrillers like Open Water. Unfortunately, it doesn't add much to the genre itself. One twist that's supposed to land with an emotional punch is telegraphed early on and in a way that will make what's coming quite obvious to keen viewers. Another twist, while not as obvious, doesn't land as well as it's supposed to. Fall's nearly 2-hour runtime also makes the circumstances feel drawn out when thrillers like these are better served with brisk runtimes that don't allow for much thought in between their obligatory plot points. As Becky and Hunter's circumstances become increasingly dire, their efforts at rescue become almost laughable. That's the problem with Fall's setup. There's not much they can do except watch from 2,000 feet in the air as their attempts fail. There's no way for them to climb down and no way for them to call for help. They must rely on harebrained attempts at contacting those on the ground, and when those fail, there's not much left. While their attempts at rescue are funny, nothing is as funny as the film's incorporation of Becky's pole dancing skills or its use of the song Cherry Pie by Warrant in one nail-biting sequence. Gardner and Currey do what they can with the material, but both Gooding and Jeffrey Dean Morgan, as Becky's father, are criminally underused, a fault of the film's setup more than anything else. Sure, the film adds a new perspective to the survival thriller genre, but it relies so heavily on the idea that heights are scary, even if its protagonists don't think so, that there's not much left beyond that by the end of the film. When Fall concludes, it commits a cardinal sin of the genre that may have audiences scratching their heads. Fall releases in theaters on August 12th. The film is 107 minutes long and is rated PG-13 for bloody images, intense peril, and strong language. The duo decides to climb the gate. abandoned 2,000 feet, which is about twice the height of the Empire State Building, AB 67 TV tower in the California desert. However, when the tower's ladder gives way, Becky and Hunter find themselves trapped at the top on a platform. Unable to call for help, they must put their skills to the test and find a way down together. Once Becky and Hunter reach the tower, Avatar skyrockets. That's once again thanks to the cinematography and the score. While watching a fall, my heart felt like it was going to jump straight out of my chest. I've never been what one would call afraid of heights, but this entire scenario left me in a state of terror even during the film's quieter moments. There are also shots that might make you experience vertigo, which makes sense considering the premise revolves around two young women climbing a 2,00-foot radio tower, much like Year 47 M. Downer 2017 from the same producers. A fire isn't what you'd call a great film. Does that mean it is a bad one? Not exactly. Even when the script stumbles, a fire is still entertaining and terrifying. Those stumbles stiff Roma developments that might make you groan out, and of course, in frustration. If you've seen a 47 or any other modern horror film, you know that most are likely to have a groan-worthy moment or several in which the protagonists run into added obstacles. There is also the added element of the other characters, like Mason Gooding Stan, who is Becky's husband, and fellow climber and Becky's father, James Jeffrey Morgan. Both men could have probably used more character development, but I understand that the narrative is so centered on Becky and Hunter. So I see why their roles are ultimately small but pivotal. They help move the story of our protagonists forward and help them grow. So I can't harp on that as much as I would in any other case. While I would have liked to seen more from them, partially because E.G. Gooding and Dean Morgano are terrific actors in their own right, Dan and James aren't pointless characters. They're essential to the narrative without ever being the focus or taking away from our two leads. The story, while predictable in some ways, does feature things that you may not see coming. Interestingly enough, I was so engulfed by the terror I felt while watching a fire that the story sort of took a back seat in terms of importance. The use of practical effects and director Scott Mann's decision to shoot on location, though not on the actual tower, of course, rather than in a studio, makes everything seem that much more real and heightened my nerves. A performance of Grace Caroline Currey and Virginia Gardner, along with their terrific chemistry, made me care about Becky and Hunter and genuinely fear for their lives because I cared about the leads. I was invested in their journey, which ends up mostly satisfying on both ends, and enjoyed the bonding moments they shared. Grace Caroline Currey is sensational as Becky, giving a chilling and powerful performance. She takes every bit of what an up-and-down script gives her and runs with it. Gardner also seizes her moments in the spotlight through How to Fire You, and without these two, the film would be nowhere near as compelling. When you consider the character of Becky was inspired by a member of director and ghostwriter Scott Mann's wife's family, whose husband had died young, it makes you think about her in a separate way. I personally didn't know that until after watching, and it made the character and Curry's performance stand out even more. Currier makes you feel every bit of Becky's grief and paint her in subtle ways that you can't put on a script page. The leads along with the cinematography score and the downright terror you'll feel make your fire worth the watch. Even if the story can have a bit of a B-movie feel, you can get in tow a fire because of everything else that it offers. Those that disagree with me will probably get good laughs out of the film and some of the things that happen to occur. If I hadn't been terrified, my guess is there's one moment that I would have laughed at. You won't really lose by watching a four-lay. What you enjoy about it might just depend on your taste. Both sides will likely only be able to agree on the high quality of Currey and Gardner's performances. Major kudos must be given to the May Cooper artists who do manage to give Grace, Caroline Currey, and Virginia Gardner some rough looks that reflect what their characters go through during the narrative of Farfall. It makes you really feel the impact of being in that situation, along with the use of far, practical effects, and shooting on location. Some of the special effects used don't always hold up, but they aren't bad by any means, given what the crew had at their disposal. The bombastic Escoria by Tim Despic is so good, soundtracking the scariest moments so far. Fire with music that's dark and that later hopeful whenever the situation calls for it. Even though the film doesn't really need it to add to the fear, it most certainly does so in an effective manner. Overall, A Fire is a thriller that will have you on the edge of your seat. The faults, it will likely be masked by feelings of terror. Not only that, but you'll likely appreciate the cinematography and the outstanding performances of Grace, Caroline Currey, and Virginia Gardner in the lead roles. The film serves as a welcome surprise for me because I wasn't sure what I'd think of it, and I came away having enjoyed every scary minute. Fall is one of those movies that makes absolutely no sense when you stop to think about it, whilst being entertaining so long as you don't think about it. My retitling of this climbing-based disaster movie would be How to Kill Yourself Conquering Your Fear of Climbing When It's Already Killed Your Boyfriend. The movie, it perfectly summarizes the plot and why you want to shake the main duo into some kind of normal mental state. Alas, we wouldn't. Have a movie, though. Fall for the fall, not for its logic, and you may well enjoy this vertigo-inducing flick. Becky and Dan are happily married rock climbers who go on an adventure with their bestie Hunter, only for Dan to fall to his death in a case of watch where you stick your rope and fastenings. We flash forward to the 1-year anniversary of his death to find Becky is now a drunk mess and Rick loose. Her father, trying to get her to rejoin the world of the living, invites Hunter to stay with Becky, but Hunter has her own views on how to get Becky out of her depression. You see, Hunter is one of those awful social media influencers who posts constantly about her dangerous climbs and extreme sports life. Off camera, she's much nicer, thankfully, and thinks taking the Becky on a climb will cure her of everything. The climb, a 2,000 feet radio tower, are the 4th tallest structure in the USA. It is a rickety metallic spine and looks like a health and safety violation from every angle. Bolts are falling off, ladder steps snap, and ladders are hanging slightly unconnected. As they climb up, everything screams, "Don't do this." And Becky is dragged like a lamb to the slaughter by Hunter up the radio tower to reach the summit. Though they take selfies, run some drone footage, and then scatter Dan's ashes. The stress on the ladders caused by the girls going up the tower breaks the ladder on the way back down, leaving them both stranded on the top spire, totally cut off from the world. After much rope swinging and a deep cut injury for Becky, they managed to find safety back on their perch, but now there is no obvious way back down. With no mobile signal, a drone that cannot fly unaided to their hotel over a mile away, and a flare gun with only a few rounds, they need to attract people and get them to notice them. After throwing a shoe down with Hunter's phone inside doesn't quite do it, they start to look at more dramatic measures. This involves some leaps of faith to get their drone back from a satellite dish about 100 feet below them, which results in Hunter being injured too. For Becky, this is all history repeating itself. In order to try something new, Becky climbs to the beacon light at the top to charge the drone and her phone whilst fighting off buzzards who can smell their wounds and fancy dinner. Sadly, the battle for the drone proves fruitless as it gets taken out by a lorry on its flight to their hotel with a note attached with options limited, no water to keep them alive, and the buzzards waiting for them to sleep. Will Becky and Hunter make it off the tower alive? The main reason Fall is worth watching is the vertigo-inducing cinematography. Seeing Becky and Hunter swinging around and hanging off ledges from 2,000 feet high looks great. The views from sunset, sunrise, and nighttime as the camera circles around the tiny platform are striking. The climbing looks very intensive, and both actresses feel like they are really being put through their paces as they swing around. The secondary element to all of this is the overarching narrative of conquering your fear. The film's message is that you should punch fear in the dick, and I like its mantra to a point. The story itself carries a lot of the middle of the film, where the two are stuck with nowhere to go, expecting help to come to them. However, instead of focusing on grief, revival, and revitalizing your life, it throws a hunter and down a fair curveball which felt somewhat unnecessary to the movie. I'd have preferred the conversations to be a little more relevant to the story, but the scenes of scattering the ashes were well done. Lastly, so much of this film could end up in the factual goof section of IMDb. I actually enjoyed thinking I don't think so to quite a lot of what happens. This is the movie of foreshadowing plot points and scenes. So, if you've seen it once already, it is going to happen on the tower too, as the movie takes place largely 2,000 feet. Up in the air, it's really tricky to know what good green screen backgrounds look like. The production actually built to 100 feet set for the top of the tower, so the actresses had something to play with, and that works really well for the panning shots. The buzzards are a fascinating addition and work well too. I was equally impressed with some of the stunt work, which certainly looks more practical than expected due to the set being a good 100 feet tall. Interestingly, the film underwent a hidden special effect to use AI to alter the lead duo's mouths to correct dialogue. The original cut of Fall contained over 30 F-bombs, and to get the film down to a PG-13 audience, they used AI to edit the mouths to alter the dialogue. I didn't notice anything specific, but seeing deep fake technology entering the film industry does make me ponder how it could be used in the future to correct footage post-release. Fall is all about Becky and getting her back on the bandwagon of life. She has a proper character arc. Buzzard slaughtering included and comes away from the movie as a woman who seems to have found life again. Hunter is an interesting one, because fundamentally she has her heart in the right place, but is way too cavalier for her own good with climbing and with her friends. No one else really gets much screen time in the movie, although Becky's father makes a strong, caring impression in his few scenes. There are quite a few things that can fit in here, but let me start off with the incredible life hack of plugging phone chargers into random lamp fittings. I hope this does work in America, and I wouldn't use my wedding ring as a conductor. How no one was electrocuted each time, I have no idea. Hunter's tattoo, 2 moves about her body, and indeed many shots that are meant to show Hunter on the satellite dish, but she's actually missing from the shot entirely. There is also one goof that really made me go no, and this is around the drone subplot. Becky pilots Hunter's drone using her phone, as they've already thrown hunters off the tower to try and alert someone. I'm not sure how she downloaded the app to get the drone to work, since the hole is hewn by 2,000 feet up in the sky in a non-mouse area. I'm picking holes, I know I am, but so much of this movie relies on the suspension of belief in physics. It made my eyes roll a few times. Let me start by saying this is an entertaining movie, and it was very successful given its budget of $3 million, and kudos to the actresses, and worth watching just for the twists and turns in the action. It's about 2 women who climb a 2,000 feet radio tower, and once they get to the top, the last section of ladder they used falls away, trapping them. But you must be willing to suspend a lot of disbelief at a number of basic flaws in the action, and have empathy with people who do stupid things for the rush and publicity. Spoilers ahead. It's spilled as a survival movie, yet the 2 women do so. Many fundamental things wrong, starting with the basic, tell someone where you're going and when you expect to be back. That is an ironclad rule of basic survival, basic camping, basic hiking. Guess they never saw the movie about the guy who got trapped with the boulder crushing his arm and having to amputate it 127 hours. Hell, they didn't carry a bone saw or even a Leatherman. Plus, she did post to her thousands of followers from the base of the tower with her plan to climb it, then simply disappeared for a couple of days. No one wondered. Actually, the opening scene where the boyfriend falls to his death violated a rule of climbing. I always have 2 pieces of protection in place. The first thing I did when I arrived at 10th Special Forces Group was going through International Mountain Climbing School, where I learned enough never to want to climb a mountain for fun again. Pay and mission. Yes, sort of the way I feel about parachuting despite triple-digit jumps and being a jump master. But okay, they were kind of stupid anyway. So, yeah, his one piece of protection failed. I knew it was inevitable that it would be revealed he'd slept with both. He was a guy. He was dead. Sure, let's throw that in, as if they didn't have enough problems. You slept with my boyfriend. Really, I had to blink when they got to the top of the 2,000 feet tower and said they had no cell phone signal, even though they'd had one. On the ground at the base of the tower. We're too high for a signal. What? I mean, they even put cell phone transmitters on top of towers. WTF, I know that was necessary for the plot, but come on. You can drive an entire plot through that plot hole. And let's not talk battery life on the phones. They were concerned about the drone's battery life, but those phones lasted forever, and they wasted a lot of power on dumb things like pictures of better days. What about using the flashlight? At night, the recharging of the drone using the light at the top. First, the scene in the dyno was dumb. Really, a waitress isn't going to let you plug in to charge your phone. Second, if the lamp was plugged in, why not use that? Plug? I don't even know if you can actually charge a cell phone using a light socket, and I'm not going to try unless a waitress tells me I can't use the plug, in which case I'm not tipping. But I do know the warning light at the top of a 2,000 feet tower is not running off 110 volt. There's some serious juice up there. I mean, come on. What might have been smart if they were going to climb to that light is disable it the first night? Don't you think some people might notice that luck? Then use the flashlights on their cell phones. Then, the one actress hanging up there by her arms to charge the drone to 4 bars. Really? Every tried to hang like that. There were little things like when the ladder went and the one woman fell, the people. Other held onto the pole with one hand and managed to stop her fall. Sorry. Nope, no one's grip is that strong. I'm sure people who are climbers were screaming at the screen many times during this movie, much like ex-military at action movies. In a way, this was the John Wick of mountain climbing. Here's the real kicker. They had a decent length of rope with them after the ladder fell. There are versions of a Prusik knot that you can use to tighten down on a rod or pole and alternately tighten and loosen. It's one of the basic knots of mountaineering. They had more than enough rope for each of them. Use such a knot, actually 2 for each, to climb down. In 2006, a film became an overnight cult sensation online before even being released, solely based on its name, Snakes on a Plane. It was a film named Snakes on a Plane that features snakes on a plane and Samuel L. Jackson swearing about the titular plane being too full of snakes. The film was neither a success nor a failure. It made its money back and was largely forgotten within the span of a couple years. Fall, a movie literally about climbing a shaky 2,000 feet fall metal structure, will more or less suffer the same fate. It's not as endearing as Snakes on a Plane, but it has the naive charm of movies that were too hastily made for their own good. So, who the far climbs a 2,000 feet tall radio tower? 2 girls, Becky Grace, Caroline Currey, and Hunter, Virginia. Gardner, 2 experienced rock climbers who take on this ill-advised challenge 1 year after Becky's husband, Dan Cuba. Gooding Jr.'s son, Mason, died a vertiginous death in another ill-advised and especially ill-equipped rock climbing endeavor. Both perceive it to be a pretty safe and straightforward healing journey until the tower's ladder collapses, leaving them stranded on top. Fall should be evaluated using one criteria only. Does it give you vertigo? The answer lies somewhere between not really and kind of it's a movie that was obviously conceived for theater screens and that will end up being watched in a home setting by most people, since it remained in theaters for a mere 6 weeks. Originally supposed to be a short, Fall is lean on thought-provoking drama and to a certain extent on the hyperkinetic thrills it promises, but the tower itself is super important. I would go as far as saying it's the most important character in the movie. It's rusted, weather-beaten, and it rattles in a worrisome way under the desert wind. It bears the weight of a history our protagonists have not lived through and don't care about. Given that Becky's sidekick Hunter is an extreme sports influencer who doesn't have respect for anything, not even her friends' boundaries, are we supposed to be entertained by this ill-conceived plan and its inevitable undoing? Are we supposed to feel Schadenfreude? I don't know. I definitely felt Schadenfreude at the two dumb girls climbing a 2,000 feet tower who was obviously falling apart, but Hunter's motives for putting her friends through this are pure. She wants to help her grieve for her husband. The collapse of the tower's ladder is supposed to be interpreted like a cruel twist of fate. That's legitimately dumb. The fact that they hadn't planned such eventuality and brought any length of rope feels even dumber. Two rednecks grilling meats near the radio tower for unexplained reasons end up stealing their car. And it made me laugh. I did not even feel bad. I don't think it was by design. Fall's obstinate refusal to either declare its protagonist stupid or complexify their story in any way, shape, or form is what makes its oddball charm. It's one of these so bad it's good movies. It has 4 characters. They don't connect in a clear and engaging way. The girls are grieving over a boy who was on screen for like 40 seconds before plunging to his doom. Becky's dad is interpreted by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who is a nice enough actor for a part that didn't even need on-screen time. You can always understand what co-writer and director Scott Mann was going for, but it never ends up making sense. Every decision seems made to make the girls climb up the tower. And once they're up there, Mann puts them through the gamut of desperate things you can do on top of a 2,000 feet tower. It climaxes with the most excruciating drone battery charging session in the history of cinema, which is hilarious in the context that Zeds are always charging their phone wherever they go. The story of Fall is presented earnestly as happening in and of itself, but nothing in this movie can be interpreted as such, which makes it extremely funny. The film opens strong with a brilliantly tense mountain scaling sequence. Bonus points for referencing the delightfully self-indulgent rock climbing set piece in Mission Impossible 22 2000, which does a great job of setting up the arc of protagonist Becky, played by a Grace Caroline Currey. Like many examples of this little genre, the need to escape the physical threat in for mirrors, an emotional need to escape an often depressive or apathetic state of mind, a need to get out of a bad spot in their lives and move on. This is vital because, despite the claim from some of seeing movies like this solely for the spectacle as simple, well-done character, arc goes a long way to making these movies feel complete, but Fall knows it has a killer premise on its hands and does not waste much time in making the most of it. This is exemplified by the initial climb up the TV tower, lovingly photographed with frequent extreme close-ups on the rusting, unstable structure and the sound design. Emphasizing every creak and thud, it's glorious, wringing out every ounce of anxiety possible. Unfortunately, once the characters reach the top, the film does run into a significant problem. There are many shots in the film where the illusion of these characters dangling 2,000 feet in the air shatters entirely when seen in such high fidelity. Even worse, these shots are largely the high-angle shots, which would, if better, the film's vertigo-inducing highlights, despite director Scott Mann's impressive commitment to shooting on location, building short segments of the tower on a mountain. According to an interview with Radio Times, these shots could only realistically have been done with a green screen. The only alternative I can think of would be filming these dangerous stunts on location and then manually removing the entire background in post-production. However, I don't blame the film too much. Here, bad use of chromie has seemingly been a growing problem across the industry in recent years, often in much more expensive films than this. Death on the Nile, 2020-22, anyone? So this isn't a movie ruining issue, especially because the cinematography more than makes up for it. The true standouts are the more straightened shots where even a tiny portion of the tower takes up the entire vertical space of the frame. Banning my eyes up and down the cinema screen, taking in the scope was a wonderful experience I haven't felt since the flight sequences in 2019's The Aeronauts. These set pieces, the initial climb, the big moment where they get trapped, and the bag retrieval sequence deliver completely what anyone who sees even a poster for this movie would hope to get out of it. Nail-biting tension as the characters are put within inches of plummeting. The last half hour of this movie slams face first into a brick wall after a trio of exhilarating action sequences. The film has the characters play around with a drone for over 15 minutes of what should be the third act, and it goes absolutely nowhere. But at this point, I was still hopeful because of something I'd read on Twitter. I try to avoid reading reviews for films I haven't seen on social media, but seeing the occasional byline is inevitable. In the case of Fall, I had seen one saying, "The climax stretched belief," and that got me excited because it immediately reminded me of criticisms of the endings of films in this genre, like 10, Cloverfield Lane, and Shadow in the Cloud 2020, which had wonderfully outlandish endings that were the perfect payoff to the hour or more of tension and disempowerment of the protagonist. These turned some people off, but I think those people are boring. So when I read that the climax of Fall stretched at belief, I thought it would end with Becky climbing down the tower as it collapsed in a lightning storm, or something to that effect. Instead, the film drops a twist that breaks the narrative irreparably. Shiloh, Virginia. Gardner turns to Becky, revealing she's been dead since the bag retrieval scene, and that Becky has been imagining her presence since to encourage herself to keep going. There's a lot wrong with this. First off, why even make this a twist? Less than 20 minutes of screen time separates the death and the reveal, which is filled with the aforementioned drone tinkering and a single dream sequence, which alludes to the twist. It would have actually been far more impactful if they had not made it a twist. Just getting it out of the way, leaving Becky isolated for the third act, would hit far harder than this try. Hard 6 cents 1999 wannabe rubbish. Second, it undermines the emotional core of the film. Becky's arc through the film has been about getting over the loss of her boyfriend in the opening and moving on with her life, rediscovering the things she loved, particularly climbing. This arc concludes during the interminable drone saga when she sheds her wedding ring to use as a survival tool. In a better version of Fall, this would likely lead into an exciting set piece where she shows how far she's come by escaping the tower by herself, having regained her love for climbing and her ability to function independently of her safety nets. Instead, this twist tells us Becky's codependence has worsened to the point where she's hallucinating her dead friend just to keep herself going and becomes nearly catatonic when this comfort is taken away from her. This just adds in a second, much sillier version of the character. We just witnessed crammed into the last 10 minutes. The primary issue with Fall is the film is simply not interested in having the characters attempt to climb down. They never even consider it. All of their plans are about getting messages to the ground, primarily by just dropping stuff. These tactics are probably more logical in a very dry mechanical sense, but they don't make for exciting viewing and completely squanders the premise that the first hour of the movie had set up so perfectly. I think one of the primary reasons this genre is so engaging is the thrill of seeing characters use their wits to escape seemingly hopeless situations, building clever traps and devices, as the characters in this movie put it, but by its end, Fall is much more interested in being bleak and gross. The movie seems to set out a clear thesis statement early on. If you're scared of dying, don't be afraid to live. Basically, don't let your fears stop you from making the most of life. Apparently, this movie's idea of not being scared to live isn't taking exciting risks, but murdering and eating a vulture and stuffing a shoe inside your friend's corpse. But even after all that, the film has one more insult left. Becky is rescued off-screen. We don't even get to see whatever helicopter or rescuer gets her down. One last slap in the face before limping into the credits. As we get closer to the end of the year, there has been one film that I have been avoiding. I have a deep fear of heights, and seeing an epic tale of survival. Maybe half a kilometer up in the air on the big screen was a bit of a stretch, but on the small screen where I can pause and walk away, well, it is now time to give it a go. So to set the scene, on a sheer cliff face, two married climbers, Becky Grace, Caroline Currey, and Dan Mason Gooding, make their way up the side of the mountain with their friend Hunter Virginia Gardner. But just when they are going to make it to the top, Dan gets spooked by a bat and falls off the mountain. He tries to swing back when his anchor gives way and he falls to his death. 51 weeks later, Becky has cut herself off from the world and is at the bottom of a deep bottle, pushing everyone, including her father, James Conner, Jeffrey Morgan, away. Trying to help her friend get out of their funk, Hunter gets Becky to come out and climb a decommissioned 2A yacht, 610-meter B-67 TV tower in the middle of the desert. The accent went well, but coming down is always the most challenging part. The first thing a fire does very well is its depiction of the physicality of the space. We see the tower from many different angles from a distance looming over us. A light on the horizon, metal ascending into nothingness. Before the first guide wire cracks, bolt wobbles, or a camera pan of corroded rust, you are already on board with the danger they are putting themselves in. The film waits a surprisingly long time before it does its first pan down to the ground below. While there is a musical score in the film, it is used sparingly, as the Foley sounds of the wind do a lot of heavy lifting regarding the tone, danger, and even the excitement. Even though intellectually I know they filmed this on a green screen or volume, that fear response triggered when they were hanging off the top of the tower to get the best selfie was real. That is because they put the work into making the backdrops, the lighting, and the wind line up with reality, so you feel that they are doing it for real, even if you know they are not. Another strength is that I felt that the friendship between Becky and Hunter was real, which is essential given that most of the film is built upon. You need that when the tension is exploding, and also for the quieter, introspective moments. It also helps that most of their decisions, well, other than the one to climb it in the first place, feel entirely rational, given their situation and lack of resources. While I found much of the film compelling, some moments felt oddly sanitized given the subject matter, and not all the visual effects worked. Still, given the micro budget, the fact that the vast majority of them did is a testament to the artists. Do we recommend a Fall? Well, if you have a fear of heights, you might want to give it a pass. And to be clear, it is not doing anything other than the scenario it is positing. However, with the constrained nature of the narrative, they tell a compelling story of survival and friendship. If there is one lesson you can take away from this film, other than you probably should know that bats live in creases on mountainsides, you should never blog and drive simultaneously. If you like to fall, we would also recommend To the Martian. Year on from a devastating free climbing accident, Becky is living life alone, drowning her sorrows, cutting out her family and friends, and walling herself up in her own grief until, that is, she gets a call from her old climbing partner, Hunter. Hunter is going to get Becky back up on her feet by taking her on her latest live-stream daredevil stunt, climbing a disused 2,000 feet TV mast in the middle of the desert. As the movie catches up with its survival thriller intentions, great things start happening. The climb up the mast is tense, shot as if any number of things could go wrong. The creaking support, wires clanking bolts, everything covered in rust and dust, all tightly framed in cuter ways from the girls themselves. When the focus is on the characters, it's almost always at dizzying angles and framed by the nauseating distant ground below. Scott Mann is a director who has clearly moved on from the Like So Far Heist 2 and a final score and is keen to show off a bag of new tricks. The tension created in the film's best moments is undeniable and visceral, but there's something holding it back. Not Scott Mann the director, Scott Mann the screenwriter. While Fire outwardly pushes a narrative where Becky develops from someone utterly reliant on others to a pillar of self-confidence and self-acceptance, there are more issues with this shark than can easily be ignored. It's the ultimate vindication of Becky's disapproving and stifling father that is a particularly bitter pill to swallow. An implied "I told you so" is never a good look, but in a movie ostensibly about trusting herself, it feels especially out of place. More interesting is the role of Hunter in Becky's newfound confidence. Most obvious is that without Hunter, Becky would never have made this journey of self-discovery. But there is also an interesting twisting of the way that the two of them interact as their climb progresses. And during their time at the top of the mast, what begins very straightforwardly as Hunter pushing too hard for the Becky to take risks outside her comfort zone, a characteristic that is initially played as domineering and unsympathetic. In contrast to Becky's very reasonable theory, becomes a complicated relationship where the risk and caution are intrinsically linked, neither extreme held up as a healthy way to live. This development feels hard-earned by the two women. Grace Caroline Currey Sham really works at making Becky a character whom the audience feels a conflict about between sympathy and pity, whilst Virginia Gardner Marvel's Runaways weaves threads of sorrow through Hunter's caustic vanity. Both do as good a job as possible at wringing depth out of otherwise shallow characters. Like all the more interesting aspects of the movie, however, a lot of work is hampered or entirely undone by a script as creaking and rickety as the old TV mast itself. Characters speak far too obviously in order to direct the audience, to flag upcoming twists, or to just plain state what they're feeling in the bluntest manner possible, creating moments of cringe-inducing unsubtlety. The direction, editing, and acting are constantly working to course correct. There's an obsession, too, with foreshadowing. A particular clunker early on has the two climbers looking at a 2,000 feet TV mast at night, and one must ask the other, why is there a light on top? For the benefit of far broken met. Bar who? Well, like everything that feels weird and out of place in this movie, it's because that light is going to be important later. And we certainly can't have the audience missing it, as if every event that happens must call back to something explicitly set up an hour beforehand. The script slips around and everyone else must immediately rush to grab the flailing body of the movie. It's an almost constant battle to brush aside bad writing and ludicrous injected peril. A battle the movie eventually loses with a series of reveals, at least one of which most audience members will have been waiting an hour and a half for, and some truly stupid foiled attempts to call for help, and finally topping the thing off with a monologue about what we all learned together on this crazy journey we call life, with its careful laying out of all its plans, callbacks, emotional beats, and revelations. A fire doesn't test suspension of disbelief so much as it tests the patience, and despite everyone's best efforts, and despite a sustained period of unrelenting and genuinely nail-biting moments, it can't outclimb crumbling construction. August has always been a wasteland, the Sunday night of months, when the weather is at its sticky worst, and everybody who has the ability to off to someplace more pleasant has already done so. If you don't have the means, there's the cheaper sanctuary of the Cineplex, with its welcoming darkness and Arctic air conditioning, except that after a summer in which theatrical releases mounted our arousing Comeback, the studios are neglected to schedule any big movies for this period in which we most need something dumb and fun. Fortunately, there's a not that big movie that fits the bill of being silly and simple enough to fill a lazy afternoon without demanding anything strenuous from its audience at all. That movie Ice of Fall, in which two young women climb up to the top of a remote TV tower for the sake of closure, and also content A and then get stuck up there. Fire is part of that grand cinematic tradition in which attractive actors get trapped somewhere dangerous and have to struggle to save themselves, hopefully for at least the 80 minutes required for an acceptable feature length. Recentish participants include Ryan Reynolds, who, in a lull in his career back in 2010, spent the entirety of Farbera in a warden coffin. His spouse, Blake Lively, who was trapped on a rock in the ocean by a persistent shark in the improbably good in 2016's of The Shallows, and Emma Bell, Shah Ashmore, and Kevin's Edges, who got marooned on a ski lift, suspended over some convenient wolves in 2010's are Frozen, like those movies offers, is a double layer of tension. A Becky Grace, Caroline Currey, and Hunter Virginia Gardner figure out a way to make it off a 2,00-foot TV tower unscathed, and will write a director Scott, man, figure out a way to draw out the suspense for long enough when there are only so many things that can happen on top of a 2,000-foot TV tower, and one of them is in the title. Does it really matter? I'm tired, tapped out, I have no means for a vacation at the moment, and nothing else left to give to this season. And a fire asks for so little that it feels like too much to do. Demand something as basic as logic or characters in return. See, Becky's husband, Dan, Mason Gooding, died during a rock climbing excursion the two of them were taking with Hunter. And a year later, Becky's still mourning. You can tell by the fact that she drinks alone at bars. Then Hunter, her internet-famous bestie, shows up with a proposal that will help Becky get her mojo back. They're going to climb the decommissioned B-67 TV tower out in the California desert. Becky is a sad brunette, and Hunter is a fun blonde, and that's about all there is to the two. Despite a brief gesture toward an extreme sports freeney's dynamic right out of the descent braving the height, looks like the bigger challenge at first. There's a ladder up the side of the tower, so it doesn't require Spider-Man-like free climbing skills, but then the ladder, rusted and neglected, shears off, leaving the two women trapped on an untouched aero platform high above the earth. There's blistering sun and an attempt to get help with a flare gun. And when things get really desperate, some marauding vultures, Mann and his crew, built a version of the tower close to a cliff to give his shots a real sense of dizzying height and a more tangible sense of danger. An incredibly weak twist pays off with a hilariously gruesome, triumphant finale. But what really makes Becky and Hunter's little saga so seasonally appropriate is that it feels like a consolation for those of us feeling a little stuck ourselves. These two daring, adventurous, eking women head off for what's supposed to be a fun getaway that tests their limits and restores their sense of self. And what happens? They get stranded, sunburnt, and dehydrated, unable to get a phone signal or anyone's attention as scavengers try to eat them. Sure, the vertiginous shots up the side of the tower are stomach-turning. But what's really satisfying is the message that sometimes it's better just to stay home. It's a fall, get it? Summer is over. Fall is a harrowing adventure movie about two women climbers. Becky is mourning her husband, Dan's accidental climbing death a year earlier. Her father tries to help, but he just drives her away. Shiloh Hunter, who was climbing with Becky and Dan that day, contacts Becky, a daredevil climber and gregarious podcast host. Hunter challenges Becky into coming with her on a daring 2,000-foot climb on an abandoned isolated TV tower in the California desert. However, when they reach the top, the external ladder totally gives way. They're too high to use their cell phones to ring for help. They must find another way down or die trying. Fall is a scary, riveting adventure movie. The plot is well constructed, and the tension mounts throughout the movie. Fall has a strong moral worldview. It promotes friendship, helping others in need, marriage, and strong, caring fathers. The relationship between Becky and her father comes to a very heartfelt conclusion. Fall is marred, however, by too many obscenities and profanities. So movie guy A, registered, advises extreme caution. Also, sensitive moviegoers may find parts of the movie too scary. Fall is a harrowing adventure movie about two women climbers, one of whom is still mourning her husband's accidental climbing death, who decide to climb an old 2,00-foot TV tower in the desert but get stuck at the top when the ladder comes off its hinges and falls. Fall has many scary, exciting moments, and there's a strong father-daughter theme in the widowed climber's story, but the movie is marred by too many obscenities and profanities, so Movie Guide Registered advises extreme caution. Movie opens with the incident that took the life of Becky's husband, Dan. They're climbing a sheer rock face of a mountain with another couple when a bird in a small cave startles Dan, and he eventually falls to his death. A year later, Becky is still mourning Dan. She only leaves their house to get food or to drown her sorrows at a local bar. Her father, James, is concerned about his daughter. He tries to help her by trying to convince her to move forward with her life and get into a rehab program, but that just drives her away. Shiloh Hunter, the woman who was climbing with Becky and Dan that day, contacts Becky, a dared evil climber and gregarious podcast host. Hunter challenges Becky into coming with her on a daring 2,000-foot climb on an abandoned, isolated TV tower in the California desert. However, when they reach the top platform, the external ladder totally gives way. They're too high to use their cell phones to ring for help. They must find another way down or die of exposure. Fall is a scary, riveting adventure movie. The two women find several unique ways to try to reach somebody. They make good use of Hunter's podcast drone, a flare gun, a rope, and a tennis shoe. But their efforts come to end. Their failures increase the tension exponentially. Grace Caroline Currey delivers a sympathetic performance as the widowed climber suffering nightmares and deep sorrow after her young husband's shocking death. Her character derives courage and determination from her rebellious friend Hunter, played by Virginia Gardner. Jeffrey Dean Morgan rounds out the top cast as Becky's concerned father. Fall has a strong moral worldview. It promotes friendship, helping others in need, marriage, and strong, caring fathers. The relationship between Becky and her father comes to a very heartfelt conclusion. Fall is marred, however, by too many obscenities and profanities, so Movie Guide Registered advises extreme caution. Also, sensitive moviegoers may find parts of the movie too scary. German film theorist Rudolf Farnheim once noted that cinema has the unique ability to produce phantom senses. A filmmaker makes aesthetic choices to access our vision, which causes our brain to create false sensory impressions such as a smell or bodily reaction. A fire would make a terrific case study to explore this phenomenon. The movie taps into our involuntary physiological response to heights. The story is about two extreme climbers trapped atop the decommissioned B-67 TV tower, one of the tallest structures in the U.S. They spend most of the 107-minute runtime at risk of falling to their deaths, clinging to rusty ladders, dangling with a tenuous grip, and looking down from a small platform 2,000 feet in the sky. Our stomachs drop and spines tingle while watching their predicament unfold to a familiar feeling among those who've ever peered over a cliff or instinctually looked down from a high place. Director Scott Mann's minimalist feature employs an effective visual technique to reproduce the impression and fear of falling. If the cliché tilde copyright, storytelling, and characters leave much to be desired, a fire at least makes us squirm and gasp in our seats. A traumatic opening reminiscent of Far Cliffhanger. 1993, Becky Grace Caroline. Currey and her husband Dan Mason Gooding climb as deep rock face with their dared evil friend Hunter Virginia Gardner. When Dan falls to his death in a freak accident, Becky spends the next year grieving and inconsolable. She has spent months listening to Dan's voicemail message on repeat in her apartment, which is littered with empty booze, bottles, and pizza boxes. Although her dad, Jeffrey Morgan, appearing all too briefly to give the movie some cred, tries to snap Becky out of her crippling grief, it's Hunter that convinces Becky to start climbing again and conquer her fear and despair with an appropriate challenge: the aforementioned tower. Hunter has since become a paid influencer who travels worldwide to complete extreme climbing challenges. She hatched the idea of climbing the tower for Becky, expecting the ascent and descent to take no more than a few hours. But the tower's unreliable rungs and loose screws have other plans for them. Just after they reach the top, the ladder detaches and they become stranded. With no way down, according to the press notes, Mann and his co-writer, Jonathan Frank, originally conceived the idea for a short film series that fell through. Enthusiastic about their concept, they expanded the premise into a feature. Their dramedy relies on banalities, but their visualization is effective. Spanish-born cinematographer McGregor, who shot 2019's A Vivarium, captures the action on location at Shadow Mountain in California. The production used actual towers of various sizes, the tallest being 60 feet, requiring the actors to be comfortable climbers, even if the actual height was much lower than the screen story suggests. The difference is rendered with CGI, which is occasionally noticeable and spoils the illusion. Most of Farfa delivers a convincing feeling that Becky and Hunter could plummet at any moment. Besides the elevation, the characters also endure usual conflicts of a stranded survival movie, including a shortage of food and water, desperate attempts to acquire help, and resident predators to a nasty kettle of vultures. But curiously, the filmmakers don't address how Becky and Hunter haven't been sunburned to a crisp after a couple of days at Top the Tower Day, although most scenes involving their attempts to problem-solve their way out of the situation using a flare, phone, and drone prove compelling. They arrive here after a series of laughably bad choices that may leave the viewer questioning whether the leads are making intelligent choices they are not. A Fire is the kind of movie that makes you want to shout, "What are you doing?" at the screen. Hunter's interest in safety is non-existent and a constant source of frustration. Worse, the hallmark were the interpersonal conflicts feel right. While stranded up there, Becky and Hunter deal with their respective loss and secrets about their relationship. Becky also spends a lot of time watching wedding videos and looking at old pictures on her phone, leading to questions about her late husband. The predictable turns, including an absurd third-act twist, play like soap opera developments, suggesting there's a much simpler survival story here that runs about 20 minutes shorter. What's that? Unfortunate is that Mann's earnest treatment of the drama has a self-seriousness that doesn't land as intended. Hey, still, any movie that can cause a phantom falling sensation suggests there's some skill behind the camera through how to fall. I noticed my guts churning, and I even felt something like vertigo at times. The way the camera moves around the tower and peeks over the rickety grate at the top leaves one dizzy, but so do the over-out characters. Currey and Gardner do their best with what the screenplay provides them, the former often bawling, the latter telling her to buck up. Overall, the setup ISA 47 Downer 2017 in reverse. Despite its familiar scenario, I may have been able to ignore its frequent dialogical platitudes and stale dramatic beats, if not for the unnecessary twist mentioned above. Disappointing as a whole, A Fire nonetheless contains a few memorable sequences that could justify a casual viewing, but don't expect to feel much beyond some unsteadiness. Movies have been around for quite some time and have had mixed results with viewers. Tales of death, dying moments, of surviving the unbridled drove of natural elements, surreal circumstances, and unlucky situations have always been fixed point of fascination with storytelling, leading to one suspense after another and finding thrills within those fight-light moments. Yet sometimes, these films struggle to find a proper balance within its own context, with an unbalanced presentation of trying to focus more on the actual survival sequences, scares, suspense, and thrills, and not much on its characters and story progression. Sometimes narrative can be well-rounded within true-life events that is based on a true story, while other times some survival accounts were created from fiction. Such prime examples of late includes 2015 of The Martian, 2015, Zoo Everest, 2016 of The Revenant, 2147M Down, 2018, Zoo Adrift, 2019's A Crawl, and many others. Now, Lionsgate and director Scott Mann released the latest film to tackle such suspenseful thrills of surviving a dangerous situation in the movie titled Fall. Does this latest project find the right stuff to present a dizzying and terrifying scenario, or is it just a shell of a story with a weak premise? Dan Mason Gooding and Becky Grace Caroline Currey. Connor are adrenaline junkies looking to find the next up excitement of exploring an adventure through nature. Taking a trip to the mountain, the couple, who are joined by their friend Shiloh Hunter, Virginia Gardner, are ready for a climbing expedition with the threesome, scaling the mountainside towards the peak. Unfortunately, disaster quickly befalls the group, with Dan losing his footing and plunges to his death during the high climb, leaving his wife shattered over the loss of life situation. A year later, Becky is drowning in sorrow and turns towards alcohol. Unable to process her grief, which worries her estranged father, James Jeffrey Morgan, who is urging his daughter to get past her fears, rescuing. To her aid, Hunter has the perfect remedy to help her friend, pushing Becky to join her as she seeks out the B-67 TV tower, which was once the highest structure in America. Now, however, the towering derelict structure is rusted over and loose bolts litter the metallic overhang. But Hunter has a YouTube channel to fill, beginning her ascent with Becky, who's trying to stay out of her head. When the pair get to the top of the tower, the ladder crumbles underneath them, stranding the friends, who are forced to work with limited options at their disposal as the fleeting happy moments are dashed by trying to survive on top of a 2,000 feet tower and try to attract help from down below. As I mentioned above, survival movies and or project endeavors have been its fair share of mixed opinions throughout the years. Of course, there are plenty of so-called survival features, including more science fiction ones, that is, cosmic disasters, alien invasions, and unearthed primordial creatures. But the ones I'm mostly talking about are the more realistic survival features that usually focus surviving natural environments, battling the elements, and dangerous real-life situations. Naturally, filmmakers clearly want to show us, the viewers, the dangers and sometimes horrific events of being stuck in these circumstances, in both the physical state of everything, characters, and environment, but also in the mental stability, in the usage of losing hope and acceptance of life finality when things look bleak. Some great survival movies have clearly demonstrated these proper balance as well. Cinematic flourishes, including The Martian, A Revenant, 127 Hours, A Everest, A Gray, and others. The flip side to that is that there are films that lack the proper guidance in wanting to showcase such balance and end up with weak characterization or lacking a proper narration that surrounds a weak survival, including A Survival Island, a 47 meters down and a 47 meters down ungauged. Regardless of which one, survival-style movies shine as beacon of understanding of the enduring of the human spirit of finding a way to survive through harsh conditions and even harsher scenarios. Of course, this brings me back to talking about A Fall, a 2022 survival thriller in the latest feature film, offering of this cinematic variety of suspenseful storytelling. To be quite honest, I really didn't hear much about this movie, which was mostly due because the project is moderately a low-budget production with not a whole of marketing campaign funds to spend on the project. I think my first introduction to this movie was when I saw the film's movie trailer a few months back, when I first saw during the coming attractions previews when I went to the theaters during the summertime. From the trailer preview alone, the movie looked to have a weak premise. I don't know, a broken bar. It was just a feeling that I had with it. It looked like it was going to filled with some heightened fight or flight mode and some suspense moments of two 20-something-year-olds who climb a TV tower and getting stranded at the top to make for some compelling thrills. Yet I did have linger feeling that this particular movie was going more primarily focused on the suspense survival angle and not so much on the character story development. So I wasn't super keen on seeing a fire when it was scheduled to be released on August 12th, 2022, and actually didn't go see in theaters. After a few weeks, I began to read a few reviews of the movie, with most critics and moviegoers having mixed opinions on. Some said it was bad, while others said it was okay. With such a large division on opinions of the movie, I decided to check out the movie when a fire came to home release, renting it on Vudu one night to see if the movie was worth seeing. And what did I think of? Well, I did have low expectations for this movie, and those expectations were really not met. Despite a few technical filmmaking achievements and few snippets of brilliance, A Fire ends up being a shallow and sometimes boring survival thriller that lacks the necessary dramatics to make up a decent endeavor. It's not disastrous, terrible, just poorly managed haphazardly, half-baked and not super exciting to fully investment in the time to watch. Fire is directed by Scott Mann, whose previous directorial several short films, such as At Tug of War, A Pocket Thief, and The Stars in Their Eyes Kids as well. As feature films like A Heist 2 and A Final Score, given his background, Mann isn't really a top-billed known director, so it's understandable that he would tackle a small-budgeted film like A Fall. To his credit, Mann somewhat does a decent job on this project, approached the feature that primarily focus on trying to make a very vertical survival movie, with a large emphasis on the terrifying moments of being stranded on top of a lonely, towering location in the middle of nowhere. To that end, Mann succeeds with The Fire capturing those moments quite well. The suspenseful scenes presented definitely do work, with Becky and Hunter slowly rising on the old and decrepit tower and then being stranded up their broken bar, isolated high up in the air with such little option to communicate with the world below them. The action thrills definitely help elevate the film's shortcoming, with Mann heavily focusing on these sequences to build dramatic tension as both Becky and Hunter scramble to find a way down or to get help. The small platform where the two girls have to survive on has that isolating feeling, finding their time up there to be the main set piece for the feature as they interact and try to make sense of the situation and trying a way to descend without falling and or dying. Heck, there is even the fear of vulture predators, that sense of their circumstance, with Mann depicting one scene with such grueling tension that it made me squirm a little bit. Basically, if you're a person who hates heights or having the vertigo sensation while watching these types of movies, Fire might not be the right viewing experience for you. Just a precautious for some viewers out there. Just remember a broken bar like Becky and Hunter in the film. A broken bar. Don't look down. Interestingly, despite the film's limitations on encompassing a strong narrative, more on that below, Thea does utilize several strong thematic messages in its tale. Of course, there is the depiction of overcoming grief. A broken bar. No matter the situation, with a heavy emphasis on letting go of the past and moving forward, which is quite universal. Secondly, the movie showcases facing fears to overcome challenges, which was shown with Becky ascending the TV tower to bypass her personal grief of losing Dan, which again is fundamental for everyone. Lastly, the actual will to survive with the insurmountable power facing danger, and sometimes certain death, and pushing yourself to fight to survive a broken bar, regardless if the odds are stacked against you. All of these key messages are quite palpable, and that to play a part of Far Falls a story which can be extrapolated into the real world, and for inspiring to move forward in the face of troubled times or survival circumstances. Lastly, Mann keeps the feature moving a moderately Fast pace and while does create some problematic areas along the way. More on that below. It does semi-work in a falls a favor with the feature having a runtime of 7 minutes, 1 hour and 47 minutes by getting in and getting out within a reasonable. In the end, while not perfect, men certainly make, Icefire has some intriguing and workable moments that keeps the feature quasi-engaged with the plight that Becky and Hunter find themselves in at the top of a 2,000 feet tall TV tower and the attempts that they make to survive. For its presentation, A Fire is a moderate production that doesn't require a whole lot to capture its story within a cinematic representation. That's not to say the movie looks cheap. And with only having a budget of only $3 million, I do believe that Mann and his team make the most of their production funds for the feature. So, working within the confines of the feature's budget, the movie utilizes what it can and ends up with some decent presentation through the usage of background setting nuances. Thus, credit must be given to the film's behind-the-scenes main players, including Pete Hickok, art direction, Scott Daniel, production design, and Lisa Catalina, costume designs, for their efforts in working with such limit budget and producing something that ultimately works. In addition, the film cinematography by McGregor is pretty good, especially with vertical shots of K67 TV tower and how dangerous the climb up it for some very dramatic-looking shots and angles. Lastly, the movie score, which was composed by Tim Dispick, is incredible to listen. While I usually do praise a lot of movies for their soundtrack and musical composition utilization in the films that are presented in Dispick's score is terrific and definitely incorporates a lot of drama nuances into the feature. The building of suspenseful moments, the bombastic pressure of dire moments, and the quieter dialogue pieces all connect beautifully in the score and help build upon the thrills that the movie throws at the viewers. Big kudos to Dispick's involvement on the project. Unfortunately, A Fall, despite its survival thrills, can't quite make a compelling argument to be considered a good, let alone a decent endeavor, with several crucial points of criticism that puncture the feature from onset to conclusion. Where do I start? Well, let's start with the most prevalent and near broken bar, the story. Of course, when I saw the film's movie trailer, I sort of kind of knew that the film's focus was going to be primarily on the actual survival elements and not so much on any type of strong storytelling beats. Even other survival thrillers out there follow that same particular suit with a heavier emphasis on action than story. That being said, what's presented in Afio is dismal a broken bar to say the least. The script, which was bent by Jonathan Frank and Scott Mann, is basically a bare-bones foundation for storytelling with a very interesting step that quickly diminishes into such a straightforward and thinly sketched tale to be told. With the movie's narrative being mostly focused on two girls stranded on top of a lonely tower, the script had such a large opportunity to explore the pair's personalities and past events within a sort of reflection flashback sequences. The script touches upon a few key elements told through dialogue exchanges, yet it feels a bit empty-handed and could have been expanded upon for more depth and understanding of these two stranded individuals. In a nutshell, AIO is a generic run-of-the-mill survival movie, with the basic of basic narrative points that had the potential to be something compelling, especially in its strong themes, yet never blossoms into something more than just a half-baked narrative that lacks substances. Naturally, this brings up the film's premise, which feels very weak and shallow. Of course, this particular setup does have some interesting build-up to the main attraction of the feature, yet it never fully delivers on the premise, with the falls, a narrative failing to fully encompass the story it wants to tell. Once the setup is presented, the movie devolves into a very straightforward narrative that feels one-dimensional, with a payoff that comes with a mixed conclusion. What also doesn't help the movie is in some of the dialogue lines that are presented throughout the movie, with some cheesy, a few cringeworthy words spoken that fall of deaf ears and feel wooden. This doesn't help the movie's more dramatic moments where these lines are spoken and render the movie's character lines as laughable in a few scenes. Some of these parts are a reflection upon the film's script, yet some come from Mann's direction, with some clearly struggling during several sequences of character. Story balance, which make Issa Fire rather bland. This brings up the film's pacing. With Mann, keep everything to the bare minimum of making the movie progress forward in its storytelling. And while this does make the film move forward in a somewhat brisk manner, this comes at the expense of expanded development in the feature for more well-roundedness. In conjunction with that, the movie does feel boring, as there's not a whole lot that happens, especially during the middle portion of the feature. Perhaps one of the more cryest parts that a presence in the story is few moments where utter overusage of key parts that are stupid, with scenes of over-the-top disbelief. For a movie that is supposed to be grounded in reality, Mann and his team heavily imply on such sequences with great ease to help build some dramatic tension. Yet despite that notion, these scenes come as utterly stupid and cheesy, which definitely took me out of the movie's world. The disbelief of such things could happen is mind-boggling, that it lessens the feature's credibility and hinges on being laughable when they appear. Thus, while the dangers of being stranded on an abandoned TV tower might feel scary, several scenes of stupidity and big disbelief diminish such magnitude of the death-daying situation. Lastly, the film's conclusion feels quite rushed and ends up hindering the feature's final moments. Of course, the closing monologue voiceover was actually great in the movie and wraps up some of the feature's themes into that portion. Yet, the actual ending feels rather clunky and hollow. It's clear that the movie wanted more to say during this part and could have been easily expanded upon by closing out character development. Yet it never, and ultimately creates a very hurried and almost anticlimactic ending that never delivers on a full circle conclusion. The cast in a film is kept relatively small and have their moments in the spotlight for some decent performances here and there. Yet this small collection of talent falters with such a flimsy script and thinly presented material that they have difficulty in trying to build upon with little go on. Naturally, the movie's two main protagonist characters, Becky Connor and Shiloh Hunter, get the most screen time in the film, with actresses Grace, Caroline Currey, and Virginia Gardner doing most of the heavy lifting throughout the majority of the feature. Of the two, Currey, who is known for her roles in Our Revenge, a Annabelle creation, and Asham is the film's true main protagonist of the feature and gets more of the substance, dialogue lines, and dramatics than her co-star lead. For her part, I think that Currey does a pretty decent job, yet still feels like a shallow main character. Of course, that's not so much on Currey's performance, but mostly on how she is written in the movie, with vague notions of her past and some corny lines to match it. It's not for a lack of trying, as we, the viewers, do sympathize with some of Becky's past troubles and current circumstances, and yet something all about rings hollow. Thus, despite Currey's attempt to help elevate the gay character, Beck ultimately becomes such an adequate main character that feels half-baked due to the feature's lack of script shaping and wooden dialogue moments. Yet I do have to admit that the final monologue scene that Currey's Becky says was pretty good. Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie 123 in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called 123. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I am going to tell you, I also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video.